In 1859, Edwin L. Drake struck oil in the small town of Titusville, Pennsylvania, and launched an industry that's forever shaped our modern world. I was able to visit the historical museum that tells the story of how Drake's well first came to be. The museum used orientation films, exhibits, oil field machinery, and historic buildings that tell the story of the petroleum industry's birth in Pennsylvania, and also its growth into the global enterprise it is today. Drake was a single-minded man in the hunt for oil while others were on the quest for the white whale. He was called Crazy Drake after pouring the modern equivalent of more than $40,000 in investors' money and his own endless labor into a search that spanned for more than a year without results. In the early 1700s, whale oil was the primary lamp fuel and lubricant. Sperm whale oil burned brighter and cleaner, but slow-swimming Atlantic whales became known as the right ones to hunt. They floated after death and were easier to process. By 1750, right whales were an endangered species. After whaling fleets traveled to distant oceans seeking smaller numbers of whales, longer voyages and declining supplies sent prices soaring. By 1830, few families could afford to pay the $2 a gallon, which is equivalent to $8 a day, and the quest was now on for an alternative. The world quickly changed after Drake's well struck oil, and a new industry was born. In Oil Creek Valley, wooded hillsides became muddy slopes covered with forests of derricks. Existing towns grew and new ones sprang up as the industry moved on, providing light, medicine, and transportation around the world. On the day of August 27, 1859, the world was changed as we know it. Sent by Seneca Oil Company to Titusville in 1857, Edwin L. Drake toured seeps on company land with Dr. Brewer. He saw that crude oil was burning in mill lamps and also lubricating saw blades. Upon hearing this report, the company hired Drake to raise and dispose of oil in Pennsylvania. In 1858, Drake returned to Titusville, purchased a steam engine in Erie, Pennsylvania, and hired Billy Smith as his driller. Drilling began in May of 1859 and struck oil at a depth of 69.5 feet in August. Pittsburgh refiner Samuel Keir was one of Drake's first customers. Here's a quick display on how Drake would extract the oil from beneath the Earth's surface. After extracting the oil, it was now time to transport it. However, this proved to be a problem. During this time, there were no railroads running through this area, so the next best thing was to transport it on water. However, the stream that it was transported on wasn't exactly the biggest. This cool diorama portrays how they transport the oil and some unfortunate problems they ran into.
The best route out of the oil region was by water, down Oil Creek to the Allegheny River to the refineries in Pittsburgh. The journey began at the well. Heavy barrels filled with oil were hauled over primitive roads in teamster wagons. At the water's edge, the barrels were loaded onto flatboats. But when the water was too low for the oil-laden boats, oil producers employed a method developed by lumber companies called a pond freshet. Old-timer George W. Brown tells the story this way.
What exactly is happening in the diorama is the barges collided with the bridge. Due to Oil Creek being very narrow, barges would have to try and squeeze their way to get through. But this was not always successful, and this time was catastrophic because the barge collided with the bridge and oil was spilled in the water, turning it green from shore to shore. Boats began piling up one by one as the creek was completely blocked. This created absolute chaos, and so much oil was lost. Not only oil, but money. The price of a barrel in 1860 was $9.60, so the loss of all this oil was killer for this emerging business. As time went on, however, the price of oil began to lessen as more and more was being found and extracted. By 1895, the price per barrel was $1.36, and it only continued to decrease until the 1900s, when the price per barrel shot up due to fluctuations in our economic world from different circumstances. So, as we exited the museum, we were met with these massive drilling rigs called derricks. These wooden drilling rigs have interchangeable parts that were standard in the Pennsylvania oil industry of this time. But as we began drilling deeper wells, we required larger, stronger derricks. Structural steel derricks were first advertised in the 1892 oil well supply catalog and became common by the 1920s. Fireproof steel rigs were easily erected and considered semi-portable because they could be disassembled and moved. Steel rigs were common until World War II, when drilling equipment mounted on trucks replaced them. So why isn't Titusville booming anymore? By 1901, the Pennsylvania oil boom was over. The formation of the Standard Oil Trust in 1882 effectively established a monopoly over the industry in Pennsylvania, and the discovery of oil in Texas, California, and Wyoming shifted the nation's attention elsewhere. At its peak production in 1891, the state of Pennsylvania produced 31 million barrels of oil, which was 58% of the nation's oil that year.
Now this is the moment you've all been waiting for. This is Drake's Well.
Let me show you around.
That's all. Thanks for watching this informational video on Drake's Well and the discovery of oil.